Welcome back to another session of Bayes Field in 5. In this one, we're going to be focused on column selections, and we're going to walk through an example of how to use it and discuss the controls a little bit. The reason we have column selections is to improve the ability for this application to work for different perspectives, right? This provides another opportunity for users to tailor-make their view, tailor-make their application into something that they need that isn't necessarily something that comes as the default. Of course, to that end, you can add your selected columns and save them into a filter template, which you can learn more about in its own video on filter templates. So let's get started. Column selections can be found under the selected dropdown. So if you open that up, you see on the left some columns that we have that aren't shown by default. And you see which ones are default by this little checkbox down here. You'll get a name here, what sort order it's in, a little bit of a description about what's going on, whether or not the column is supported to be sorted is also shown there. And of course, these are the ones on the right that are actually shown on our screen. So we can always slide them all to the left. We can add them all to the right. And when we save, it'll change the view to include all of those columns, right? So now we have a whole bunch of extras. When you do select those columns, you do get this little table icon showing you that you're no longer using the default selected, right? So if we go back to this, you can always go back to your default, which will reorganize it back to what we have by default. So let's walk through a little example here and show you some of the functionality here. Let's imagine we want to take a look at some of the allocation information. So we want to set up an event view here that's going to be based on allocation, so we can view that. Maybe we want a couple of less columns than is typically there. And we definitely will want to bring in these two allocation specific columns, right? So first thing we could do is bring those two columns on the right. It'll add it to the bottom by default, right? We can bring our little actions checkbox to the bottom to make sure that's consistent. And let's just, assume that we're going to look at all of our events are actually closed. So we don't actually need to see the close time. We just need start time and duration. For allocations, we're not really concerned about the labels, so we can remove that column, right? And now we have sort of this custom look and feel. So now let's save and take a look. Looks like we got a lot of our columns set up, right? So let's drop this filter to give us a better view, and let's add some of our filters to make sure that this fits. First thing here is let's look at things that have allocations in general. And like we were saying, we're going to look at all closed events. Right, and now we can take a look at that. And we see we've adjusted the view completely to now show what allocation is active, what loss energy is associated with it, and added a couple of filters. So now that we get a more allocation-centric view just by adjusting the columns. And of course, what we could do here is save this to a filter template. And then remember that every time that we come through and do this at a different time. So with that example ran through, also one thing to note is that it's good to go and check the available columns every now and then or every release, because you're going to see some things in here that you might not expect or that you don't see by default. Like if you go over to cases, there's a bunch of task columns or related event columns or related allocation columns or different things that you might not expect to see, like the actual case ID as an option. So it's always good to dive in there and take a look and see what's available. And of course, if you have any columns that you would like to see that you don't have in here, please reach out to us and we can see if we can add it for you. Thanks for joining me for another session of Bayes Field in 5. This was all about picking columns.